The police officer raised his baton high and struck Chuck Norris across the shoulder. The sharp sound echoed through the street. People froze. A woman gasped. Someone shouted, "Hey! What are you doing?" The officer sneered. "I told you to move back," he barked. "Or do you think the rules don't apply to you?" Chuck Norris didn't stumble, didn't flinch, didn't even change his expression. He stood there, calm, silent, steady. The crowd waited for anger, for shouting, for violence. But instead, Chuck slowly turned his head. His eyes met the officer's. There was no rage in them, only quiet disappointment. The officer laughed nervously. "What? Cat got your tongue?" People began whispering. "Why isn't he reacting? Is he scared, or just crazy?" "Man, that hit looked hard." Phones came out. Red recording lights blinked. The officer stepped closer, emboldened by the silence. "You think you're tough because you're old? This badge means authority. You don't question me." Chuck finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, almost gentle. "You shouldn't raise your hand so quickly," he said. "Especially when you don't know who you're raising it against." The officer scoffed. "Oh yeah. And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Chuck didn't answer. He simply looked past the officer, at the crowd, at the chaos, at the fear spreading through innocent faces. For a brief second, the street felt different. Quieter. Heavier. As if something big was about to happen. A man in the crowd whispered, "That guy. He looks familiar." Another shook his head. "Nah. Just another civilian." The officer adjusted his grip on the baton. Confidence dripping from his tone. "You got 5 seconds to move," he warned. "Or the next hit won't be so light." Chuck took a slow breath. Still no fear. Still no anger. Just patience. And that's when everyone realized something was wrong. Because no normal man stands that calm after being hit by a baton. No normal man looks at a police officer like that, without hatred, without panic. Whatever was about to happen next wasn't going to end the way the officer expected. And from this moment forward, every person standing there would remember this night for the rest of their lives. The street didn't always feel tense. Just an hour earlier, downtown Texas was alive. Music playing from nearby speakers, families walking around, volunteers handing out flyers for a local charity event. Police had blocked off 2 lanes to control traffic, and most people were cooperating. Most, but not Officer Daniels. He had been on duty since early morning. Heat, noise, and frustration had worn him down. And when pressure rose, so did his temper. He paced back and forth, baton in hand, shouting orders louder than necessary. "Move back. Stay behind the barrier. Don't make me repeat myself." To him, control meant obedience. And obedience meant power. People complied, not because they respected him, but because they feared him. Then there was the man in the denim jacket. Chuck Norris had arrived quietly, without security, without attention. He wasn't there to argue or protest. He had been invited to attend the charity event honoring veterans and first responders. But instead of pushing toward the front or announcing his presence, he chose to stand at the edge of the crowd. Observing, listening, respecting the space. A child nearby tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, that man looks like someone from TV." She glanced over, then shook her head. "Don't stare. Mind your business." Chuck smiled faintly. Officer Daniels noticed him almost immediately. Not because Chuck was loud, but because he wasn't. In a crowd full of movement, stillness stands out. "You!" the officer snapped, pointing his baton. "Back up." "No. I'm not in the way," Chuck replied calmly. "There's space behind me." That calm answer irritated Daniels. "I didn't ask for your opinion," he said. "I gave you an order." Chuck didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood his ground. People nearby started watching. A man whispered, "Why's that officer so aggressive?" Another replied, "Just move, man. Not worth it." But Chuck wasn't trying to challenge authority. He was testing something else. Character. Officer Daniels stepped closer, invading his space. You think because you're old, I'll go easy on you? Chuck looked directly at him. Age had lined his face, but his posture was straight, balanced, the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime in discipline. Respect works better than force, Chuck said quietly. That sentence flipped a switch. To Daniels, it sounded like disrespect. And to a man driven by ego, calm advice feels like an insult. Last warning, Daniels growled. The crowd went silent again. No one expected what happened next. The baton swung. And the moment it landed, everything changed. But what no one there knew, not the crowd, not the officer, was that this quiet man had spent decades mastering control, restraint, and strength. He wasn't just standing there by accident. He was standing there to remind people of something the world often forgets. True power doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. And it never needs to prove itself. And soon, Officer Daniels was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The sound of the baton hitting Chuck Norris echoed louder than anyone expected. Not because of the force, but because of what didn't happen next. Chuck didn't fall. He didn't stagger. He didn't grab his shoulder. The crowd waited for pain, but saw control. Officer Daniels blinked, surprised. For a split second, uncertainty crossed his face. Then his ego kicked in. What? You think that didn't hurt? He sneered. Want another one? Chuck slowly turned toward him. Every movement was deliberate. Measured. People close enough could see it now, the discipline in his stance, the balance in his feet, the relaxed hands that weren't clenched in anger. Step back, Chuck said quietly. This doesn't need to go further. That calm voice felt louder than a shout. Daniels laughed, but it sounded forced. You don't give me orders, he snapped. I enforce them. The crowd began murmuring. That guy's not scared. Why is the officer pushing this? This is getting ugly. A young volunteer whispered, Someone stop this. Daniels raised the baton again, not to strike, but to threaten. You think you're special, he said. I can make you disappear for the night. Chuck met his eyes. I've seen real power, Chuck replied. And it doesn't need to threaten. That sentence cut deep. The officer stepped closer, chest puffed out. You're resisting, Daniels said loudly, so others could hear. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Chuck didn't move. Not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't escalate. Behind them, an older sergeant watched from a distance. Something about the man in denim didn't sit right with him. The posture. The eyes. The stillness. He'd seen that before, in training rooms, in men who had nothing to prove. Daniels reached for Chuck's arm. That's when Chuck moved. Not fast. Not violently. Just enough. He shifted his weight, gently redirecting the officer's grip, a motion so subtle most people missed it. But Daniels felt it. His balance broke for half a second. Enough to shake his confidence. What the... Daniels muttered. The crowd gasped. Did you see that? He didn't even try. Chuck released the arm immediately and stepped back, hands open. I don't want to hurt you, he said. But you should stop. Silence spread like a wave. Daniel's face burned red. In front of everyone, he had just been checked, without force, without disrespect. And that made him angrier than any insult. You just assaulted an officer, he shouted into his radio. I need backup. Radios crackled. Heads turned. Phones zoomed in. And that's when a voice cut through the noise. Daniels, stand down. The older sergeant walked forward now, eyes locked on Chuck. His heart pounded. Because he finally recognized him. And he knew this situation was already far beyond control. Daniels, stand down. The command came from Sergeant Miller, his voice calm but firm. Officer Daniels froze. What? He snapped back. Sir, this man just assaulted me. Chuck Norris stepped back another pace, giving space, his hands still open. I touched him to stop this from getting worse, Chuck said evenly. No harm was done. The crowd leaned in. Sergeant Miller studied Chuck closely now. The denim jacket. The posture. The controlled breathing. Miller's brow furrowed. He'd seen that stance before, not on civilians, but in training videos, military demonstrations, and old VHS tapes from decades ago. A woman whispered, "Why does the sergeant look nervous?" Miller took another step forward. "Sir," he asked Chuck, lowering his voice, "may I ask your name?" Chuck hesitated, just a second. "Chuck," he replied. That single word hit Miller like a punch. His eyes widened slightly. "Chuck." Not shouted. Not announced. Just said. Miller swallowed hard. Behind him, radios crackled louder now. "Unit 7, report status." "Do you need assistance?" Daniels felt the shift in the air. "Sergeant," he said, forcing confidence, "you're taking his side." Miller didn't answer right away. He turned to Daniels. "Did you give him a lawful reason for force?" "He refused to move." Miller's jaw tightened. "Did he threaten you?" Daniels hesitated. "No, but..." "Did he touch you first?" Silence. The crowd noticed. A man near the barrier muttered, "Oh." Miller faced Chuck again. "Sir, are you here for the event?" Chuck nodded. "I was invited. I didn't want attention." That confirmed it. Miller exhaled slowly, then straightened his posture. "Officer Daniels," he said loudly enough for others to hear, "lower your baton." Daniels stared at him. "Sir." "Now." Reluctantly, Daniels lowered it. People began whispering openly now. "Who is that guy? Why is the sergeant acting like this? Did we miss something?" A teenage volunteer pulled out her phone and whispered, "Wait. I think that's Chuck Norris." The name spread like electricity. "No way. It can't be. From the movies." Miller turned to Chuck, respectful now. "Mr. Norris," he said quietly, "I apologize for how you've been treated." The crowd gasped. Daniel's face went pale. "Mr. Norris." Before Chuck could respond, engines roared in the distance. Black SUVs rolled into view. Slow. Heavy. Official. They stopped at the curb. Doors opened. Men in suits stepped out quickly, scanning the area. One of them hurried forward. "There you are, sir," he said, extending his hand. "We've been looking everywhere." The crowd exploded. "Oh my God! It really is him. Chuck Norris." Daniels felt his knees weaken. Miller stepped closer to him and spoke quietly. "This event," he said, "is honoring veterans and first responders." He paused. "And Chuck Norris is tonight's guest of honor." Daniels looked at Chuck, the calm man he'd just struck. Chuck met his eyes. No anger. No pride. Only calm. And in that moment, Officer Daniels understood something terrifying. He hadn't just hit a man. He had humiliated himself, in front of everyone. The street felt smaller now. Every eye was locked on Chuck Norris. Whispers turned into clear voices. Phones were no longer hiding, they were raised high. "Is that really him? That's Chuck Norris. No way this is happening live." Officer Daniels stood frozen. The baton felt heavy in his hand, heavier than it ever had before. One of the men in suits stepped forward again, addressing Sergeant Miller. "We're from the event committee," he said. Mr. Norris was scheduled to arrive quietly, but security lost track of him in the crowd. He turned to Chuck, concern clear on his face. "Sir, are you injured?" Chuck gently shook his head. "I'm fine," he said. "There was a misunderstanding." That word, misunderstanding, cut deeper than anger ever could. Sergeant Miller turned toward Officer Daniels. "Do you understand who this is now?" Daniels swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." His voice barely came out. Miller gestured toward the crowd. "You struck a man without cause. You ignored de-escalation. And you embarrassed this department." Daniels' shoulders slumped. "I thought he was just another civilian," he muttered. Chuck stepped forward. "That's exactly the problem," he said calmly. The noise dropped instantly. "When you wear authority," Chuck continued, Every civilian deserves respect, not just the famous ones. People nodded. Some clapped quietly. A woman wiped tears from her eyes. Chuck turned to Daniels directly. "You didn't know who I was," he said. "And you shouldn't have to." Daniels looked down. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I let my temper control me." The men in suits exchanged glances. One of them leaned toward Chuck. "Sir, how would you like us to proceed?" The crowd held its breath. Punishment, arrest, public humiliation. Chuck paused, long enough for the silence to hurt. Then he spoke. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I want accountability." He turned back to Sergeant Miller. "Handle this the right way," Chuck said. "Not for me, for the badge." Miller nodded firmly. "Yes, sir." He faced Daniels. "Officer Daniels, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of the night," he announced. "Internal review will follow." Daniels nodded. No arguments. No excuses. As he handed over his baton, the crowd watched quietly. Chuck didn't celebrate. He didn't smirk. Instead, he turned toward the people. "This event is about service," he said. "Let's not forget that." Applause broke out, slow at first, then louder. Some people cheered. Others simply stood in respect. Chuck began walking toward the SUVs. A young man called out, "Chuck, why didn't you fight back?" Chuck stopped and turned. "Because real strength," he said, "is knowing when not to." The crowd fell silent again. And in that moment, everyone understood. The legend wasn't in the kicks or punches. It was in the restraint. The crowd slowly began to settle. Police officers repositioned the barriers, this time with calmer voices and gentler gestures. The tension that had filled the street minutes earlier faded into a quiet awareness, the kind that lingers after something meaningful has happened. Officer Daniels stood off to the side now. No baton, no radio, no authority. Just a man in uniform, staring at the ground. Sergeant Miller walked over to him. "You messed up," Miller said quietly. "But this doesn't have to define you." Daniels nodded, eyes glassy. "I forgot why I joined," he said. "I wanted control, not service." Miller placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then remember this moment," he replied. "Let it teach you." Across the street, Chuck Norris spoke briefly with the event organizers. They apologized again and again, but Chuck waved it off. "No harm done," he said. "Let's focus on the reason we're here." The charity event resumed. Music returned, softer this time. Volunteers went back to their booths. Families relaxed. But something had changed. People watched Chuck as he walked through the crowd, not like a celebrity, but like a teacher. He stopped to shake hands with veterans. He bent down to speak with kids. He thanked police officers who were doing their jobs with patience. One young officer approached him nervously. "Sir," he said, "how did you stay so calm?" Chuck smiled. "Because anger gives away your power," he answered. "And calm takes it back." The officer nodded, as if he'd just been given a lesson he'd remember forever. Nearby, Officer Daniels watched all of this. No cameras were pointed at him now. No voices shouting. Just reflection. Later that evening, Sergeant Miller addressed the officers privately. "What happened tonight," he said, "was a failure, but also an opportunity." He looked directly at Daniels. "You'll face review. You'll face consequences. But if you learn from this, you can come back better." Daniels stood straighter. "Yes, sir." When the event finally ended, Chuck prepared to leave. Sergeant Miller walked him to the SUV. "Thank you," Miller said, "for how you handled this." Chuck nodded. "I've seen what happens when power goes unchecked," he said. "That's why moments like this matter." As the door closed and the SUV pulled away, people waved, not because of fame, but because of respect. Officer Daniels watched the vehicle disappear. He took a deep breath. That night, he went home changed. Not because he met a legend, but because he met humility. And the lesson was simple. Authority doesn't make you strong. Character does. That night in downtown Texas wasn't remembered because a celebrity showed up. It was remembered because of a choice. A choice to stay calm when anger would have been easier. A choice to show restraint when violence was available. A choice to teach instead of destroy. Chuck Norris could have reacted in 100 different ways. He had the skill. He had the strength. He had the reputation. But real power isn't about what you can do. It's about what you choose not to do. The police officer who raised his baton believed authority came from force. From control. From fear. But within minutes, he learned a lesson that takes some people a lifetime to understand. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. And humility isn't weakness. It's mastery. When Chuck stood there calmly, after being struck, he showed something rare in today's world, self-control. In a moment where cameras were rolling and egos were high, he didn't perform. He didn't escalate. He didn't seek applause. He sought understanding. That moment didn't just change one officer. It changed everyone watching. Parents explained to their children what real strength looks like. Young officers saw an example they weren't taught in training manuals. And strangers walked away quieter, thinking deeper than before. Because the truth is, we all wear a kind of badge. Some wear uniforms. Some wear titles. Some wear success. And how we treat people when we think we're in control reveals who we truly are. Chuck Norris didn't need to remind anyone who he was. His actions spoke louder than his name ever could. He reminded us that dignity under pressure is the highest form of strength. That patience is a weapon sharper than anger. And that respect given freely has the power to disarm even the most heated situations. So the next time someone tests your patience, disrespects you, or underestimates you, remember this story. Remember that silence can be louder than shouting. That calm can be stronger than fists. And that walking away with your values intact is the greatest victory of all. Because one day, the person you look down on might be the person teaching you a lesson you never expected. If this story made you think, type respect in the comments. If you believe real strength is self-control, type strength. And tell me where you're watching from. I read every single comment. Thank you for listening. Stay humble. Stay strong.